Hello, my name is Brandon James Bowden, and this slide presentation is in partial fulfillment of asymmetric and irregular warfare class submitted to Dr. Sean Carrington of Liberty University. My presentation is entitled War with Iran. The following is for classroom discussion only and is not intended for public release. If you happen to find this presentation online in any format, YouTube or any other social media platform, please be aware that not only is it a classroom assignment, it also does not reflect any official United States policy planning on behalf of the United States government, and no organization or think tank in the United States or outside of the United States has contributed to this material. It is entirely a theoretical work for a classroom assignment. Will we go to war with Iran? Why should we go to war with Iran? Well, before we answer those questions, we must answer a question about what is happening right now. What about the protests that are taking place in Iran? We are currently witnessing an uprising against the Iranian government by many ordinary Iranians in several parts of the country, which is good news and which should be well received, but I believe should be received with caution. And the reason why is that, as it says here, there is no certainty that a new government would be necessarily friendlier or less hostile or welcoming to the West. We do not have a firm grasp on all of the participants, nor on all of the participants' individual motivations for participating in the revolt and the protests that are going on right now. And we have, over the last 3 years, watched a large number of protests take place in Iran in different sectors, particularly in some of the sectors that I will speak about in this presentation. So that is encouraging, but the latest protests do appear to be something of a culmination. But again, there is no certainty that the outcome of these protests will be in any way favorable to the United States, towards Israel, or our allies such as Kuwait. The Iranians are protesting against extremism, but not against their fundamental faith. If a hijab is to be worn or not worn, or how it is to be worn, I believe is secondary to the fact that most Iranian women probably will still wear the hijab and probably see it as a fundamental part of their faith. So we should not see this as a feminist type movement or a pro-Western movement, and it's simply a movement that says we have our own individual limitations on how far the government can push us. But again, there is some suggestion that most Iranians are not as fundamental or radical as their government, but this does not mean that they are moderate, at least as far as the West understands this. Now, if these protests do continue and they become significant enough, they could delay the nuclear program, or they could hinder other operations. But right now, the Iranian government has demonstrated that they can walk and chew gum at the same time. And we have seen that they have launched, according to some news reports, up to 70 ballistic missiles against northern Iraq in the last 24 hours. So right now, as it stands, we don't see that their resources are stretched so thinly that this government appears to be in any way collapsing or strained, but the cracks are beginning to show in some news reports. But this project reflects an either-or outcome, a war with Iran under any circumstances. And that is going to be illustrated here in a few moments. One of the things that we have to deal with right now is the Iranian leadership. Right now, we currently have the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, who is only the second leader of Iran since the revolution in 1979. He has been charting something of an individual course from Khomeini and has been putting his stamp and mark on the institution of being the supreme leader. And he continues to do that in many ways. Yet we do know that his health is failing. We know that recently he has been in much different settings. There are rumors that he has been in the hospital, that he has been in ill health and has been trying to recover from surgery. With the current economic status of Iran, it is hard to tell how good medical care is at this point, but it may not be that good. We know that there's the possibility that he was at a sermon or a message put on in front of other lesser ayatollahs and imams, but he was propped up against a wall in a far part of the auditorium and covered with a mask. And some of this suggests the possibility that it may not even have been him present. Also, there has not been any media release. There has not been any video of him speaking about the current protest. And the question is maybe if he has already passed away and that the leadership is currently in transition. One of the Iranian papers announced that he had visited a memorial for the Iran-Iraq War recently, but again, this was at the very outbreak of the protest, and it seemed that that was not a concern of his, and there was no statement. Now, we have to consider what kind of regime Iran is and consider whether they are as reactionary to events and as concerned with events as, let's say, United States presidents or prime ministers of Israel or England would be, and have to feel like they need to issue a public statement for every event in their national life. But given that the protests have gone on for as long as they have, and we have seen no statement, it does certainly raise some significant possibilities that he has already passed away. His son, Ayatollah Mujtaba Khamenei, was elevated to the Ayatollah status either late last year or very early this year. And he is 52 years old. Some reports put him at 54. He is expected or rumored to be in a line of succession. And this is a part of Khamenei's, Ali Khamenei's stamp on the leadership of Iran. Since we had Khomeini and he did not have a son to succeed him, this is an important opportunity for Ali Khamenei to make a stamp on the institution going further, and whether it is going to be based not only on the rank of Ayatollah, but also on primogeniture, the succession of the firstborn son. Now, again, media reports indicate that this is not highly favored amongst at least a very strong faction of the Guardian Council, and could prove to be a very significant problem within the country. In fact, some of the protesters don't want Mujtaba to succeed his father, and that has also formed a core of the issue of these current protests. We also have President Ibrahim Raisi, who is also a possible successor to the leadership on the passing of Khamenei. He has checked all the boxes for succession that would normally be given: leadership of a seminary, leadership of the Council of Seminaries, and holding a lot of the different important posts within the government. So just like the Romans followed the cursus honorum, Raisi has followed the Iranian cursus honorum in order to succeed to leadership. So there is a contest between the two, And even Musavi has weighed in on this from house arrest and has favored Raisi over Mustafa, particularly for leadership qualification reasons. But additionally, we see in the government that there is the 88-member Guardian Council. And in the next slide, we'll see how there's essentially two governments that function in parallel. So this slide was obtained from the Council on Foreign Relations, and it shows the Iranian regime structure. It shows at a quick glance two very important aspects. Number one, it is a very complicated leadership structure, and it is divided into two different areas. We have more of the secular representative side, and we have the religious side. And on the religious side, we have the IRGC, but there is still a normal Iranian army. The IRGC, the Revolutionary Guards, are simply a more highly favored type of army that runs in parallel. Thus, if the protesters succeed in bringing down one part of the government or one government, they may be faced with still yet a second one. And it depends on which one falls as to whether the second one will fall or still remain and succeed. So it has really insulated itself very well against the possibility of not only warfare from the outside, but also really internal revolt by having this type of dual functionality. And we can also see here to the right how the Expediency Council and the Guardian Council, as well as the judiciary, they have intertwining responsibilities, and leaders can be called upon and elevated through each branch. So why do I believe that Iran is the most significant threat? Well, I have listed here 5 items, but I put in a 6th item here, not only for symmetry, but also because with Iran, as well as in many other contexts, it's sometimes not just the parts, but also the sum of the parts, or how the parts are interlocked and connected. We see here drone warfare, biohazard, radiological, cyber warfare, Hezbollah, and terrorism. And I'll go down the list here in no particular order, but so let's begin with cyber warfare. Cyber warfare has been explored by me in this class and has been demonstrated to be a significant threat. It can be a threat to our allies all around the world, in the Middle East, as well as here in the United States. They were infected with the Stuxnet virus, and word is that they have been able to at least break it down into its base component parts and have been able to reassemble it into sandworm type viruses, which are capable of sleeping inside systems, kind of like sleeper terrorist cells, ready to be activated upon request and deployment. So this cyber warfare capability alone could bring down banking systems, could interrupt hospital systems, could turn off electrical power in the United States, could cause infrastructure such as water pipes, water management, waste management to malfunction. We have seen individual acts of this take place in places like New York, California, Arkansas, and Texas. So they are exploring and attempting to exploit vulnerabilities, and they could deploy this capability against a wide number of targets, not just the government, but also civilians, or not just civilians, but also the government. The banking sector is highly vulnerable to multiple threats. And we know that Iran and Israel are pretty much right now in a 24-hour tech cyber warfare state right now. So it can very easily be redirected to the United States. They also have the threat of radiological devices. A lot of people in the world is very focused on a nuclear Iran, but nuclear breakout does not have to be the worst possible scenario. If Iran is able to construct a fission or fissile material device, even a low yield nuclear bomb, or even something that would qualify from dirty bomb upwards, this can have severe impacts. A small radiological device could be detonated in Kuwait, could be detonated in Israel, could be detonated in one of our European allies' capitals, or even Turkey, thus bringing an attack to our NATO allies, and it could also be possibly delivered to the United States. So Iran does not have to develop a full nuclear capability to have a distinct threat. It can just simply develop enough of a bomb in order to create psychological damage, infrastructure damage, uh, cause a shutdown in the economy and the country. Perhaps if one is detonated in New York or Los Angeles or San Francisco, Dallas, Atlanta. Many of these cities represent different key industries in the United States and could be vulnerable to attack. Likely New York would be that, in my experience in world travel and teaching in South Korea, Japan, Mongolia, and having contact with people in the Middle East. Most people, when you ask them about what is a city in the United States, or where do you come from, and they say, do you come from New York? Do you come from Los Angeles? They identify these two cities as the main cities in the United States. And so for many international audiences, this and national audiences, these two cities, Los Angeles and New York, would make the most profitable psychological targets available. We also face the drone technology that Iran has developed and has exported. They have exported it to Azerbaijan. They have exported it to Yemen. They are now exporting it to Russia and possibly even China. The drones are now capable of flying as much as 1,200 miles, reaching from northern Yemen all the way to the Gulf of Aqaba in southern Israel. We have seen that they can reach targets from Yemen into Abu Dhabi and Dubai. So these drones, which have the capability to do, as they say, kamikaze attacks, or just to be self-guided, delivered into a structure, is now a very real threat. And once again, these pose a significant challenge for our regional allies, as well as us here in the United States, because these could obviously be launched from offshore. They could also be launched internally. Much of the technology probably even derives from Western parts and Western technology, base technology. And so constructing something like this inside the United States and having it ready is certainly possible. And this is where we start to enter the mutually reinforcing type of technologies and why Iran is such a threat, because they can combine the drone threat with a radiological device put inside. And then if you have one that is delivered and it is well known that it was delivered by drone, then you're going to have mass panic in cities. You're going to have mass chaos, people trying to get to cover, people possibly and potentially rioting in the streets, or a collapse of social structure because of the threat of a nuclear or radiological device being set off in their cities. And we see this referenced in Friedman. He discussed in his work about the possibility of air attacks and how it was theorized that something similar to that could happen. And whereas Friedman then goes on to say and speak about how it is dismissed, I think that we have seen with 9/11 I remember that experience very clearly, that 9/11 on that day, even though I was in Dallas, there was a lot of psychological distress. Many people were in panic. Uh, all airline traffic was automatically shut down across the country, and if somebody saw an airplane in the sky, people were panicking. And some of the planes that were able to get off before flights were grounded, students outside my college were looking at and saying, "Oh, there's a plane. Let's see where it goes, and if it goes towards downtown." So there was a lot of anxiety, and this could produce such a threat. Moving on, we have definitely threats represented by Hezbollah and the various militias, the proxies which Iran has successfully deployed in Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon. I do not any longer see Hezbollah, Islamic Jihad, or some of these groups as terrorist organizations. I've been working on a paper that discusses how they are now more militias. They are structured armies. They have ranks. They have soldiers. They have committed missile technology corps. They have committed tank corps. They have armored corps. So they are functioning as miniature armies. But this is actually not to downplay the threat, but in a lot of ways exacerbates that threat. It raises the stakes, because if they are to face Israel or to face American troops will not be fighting jihadists who essentially want to be killed or don't have anything more than basic training, but we could be facing well-organized miniature armies in the field who can pose individual threats on a brigade or battalion level. And then, of course, there is the possibility of terrorism, sleeper cells throughout the United States, Israel, and Europe. And these do remain very real, legitimate threats. People have been caught at the southern border. I believe it was late last year that a gentleman was caught sending medical uniforms from New York to places in the Middle East. And these were, one man had actually been caught at the border crossing into the United States wearing an actual New York medical response team first responder jacket, and it was a complete uniform. So it was very odd to see this man fully dressed in a complete uniform, and he had said that he had gotten it from the United States. So there are people who are prepared to pose as first responders, potentially law enforcement, military, or other government officials who could launch attacks based on people dropping their guards and believing that they are about to be helped when they're about to be killed. Now, this sixth picture here, down here, the puzzle pieces, again, just kind of represents that idea that all of these have interlocking and corresponding capabilities. All of these could be deployed on a single day, at a single notice. Cyber warfare attack disrupts things beginning early in the morning, then suddenly we find out that there is a drone that has flown over a United States city or has impacted the strategic oil supply or various other very important government structures. There's been a detonation, possibly a radiological device in Washington. All of a sudden we hear about a terrorist attack on a subway in New York or on a bus in Los Angeles that's been detonated, or mass shooting. And then we learned that the militias have been mobilized, such as Hezbollah and Islamic Jihad, or maybe even Hamas. They have been activated and are actively attacking targets inside Israel or Kuwait or in Turkey, NATO allies. And so All of these can take place at a single time and represent a very intense possible way for us in the US to be attacked. So Iran has figured out a way to conduct full-scale asymmetrical warfare. Obviously, none of these is a traditional land combat type of scenario that the United States typically excels at. Typically, the United States excels at large-scale battlefield tactics. Yet, all of these individual pieces could cripple the United States in multiple different ways. So, what are the challenges and opportunities? If we did attack Iran, what would we be facing? Well, we would be facing one of the largest Western Central Asian countries, and it is the country with the most challenging geography. We have to the left the Zagros mountain range, which corresponds to the entire western border of Iran. There is only a handful of access points through these mountains and points where there is strategic opportunity. And some of this will be explored in more detail in the following slides, but I do want to point out that there is a green spot. It's somewhat triangular in form there along the coast of the Persian Gulf and alongside Iraq and Kuwait. That is an exploitable zone, but again, there are very few of them. And you can see on this physical map that the geography definitely would channel and challenge the United States forces and allies in any attack. Somewhat favorably, but also somewhat disfavorably. And it's also this challenging geography that would determine the forthcoming strategy in order to attack it. But over here, there is an opportunity, and to the right, we see this picture, and we see the ethnic distribution of Iran. And we notice that the core of the Persian ethnicities are located not only within the country, but kind of in a V pattern or an arrowhead shape. Now, on the two respective far ends, we have to the north, represented by the light green and light blue areas, two different ethnicities. First, we have the Azizis, and then we also have the Kurds. Both of these groups are traditional enemies of the Iranian government and the Persians, and they have been long fighting for their independence. This is historical fighting for independence, and so that is an opportunity, and I will go into more detail, but we should be cognizant of that. Also cognizant of the opportunities the Persian Gulf Islanders and the people represented by the purple area, that is Iranian Baluchistan, but it is next to the Pakistani Baluchistan, and there are some shared ethnic characteristics in that area. There's a very ill-defined border, and many people just cross back and forth with no regard to the border. And so there are many Pakistanis who are not necessarily loyal to the government. And we see this in the protests. The protests have been most severe in these respective far distant points. Now, protests have occurred in almost all major cities, but definitely these two areas represent the most severe challenge to the Iranian government. We also have the area there in brown, which is Arabstan, or mostly referred to as Arabstan. It is the area of the ancient Elamites. It is predominantly, if not wholly, Arab with a little Persian mix. It is the site of Hafez, which is a city which has had a lot of known fights with the government, and it is definitely an area ripe for exploitation. It is also an area that is rich in resources. So let me go ahead and proceed to the next slide so we can cover these in more detail. So I have sectioned these areas off in red, so anything either contained within or next or behind the line is an area of uh, strategic vulnerability for the Iranian government. So again, the region surrounding Tabriz, there in the far north, encircled. Again, Kurdish area, ready to rebel, wanting to rebel and get out of the country. Very opportunistic to have a group of soldiers put there. Ahavez and also Bushir. These are key areas to quickly move troops into and secure. And I'll just go ahead and put this map up. The reason why I believe, well, definitely Bushir is also a key area because it represents the oil pipeline. It's one of the main oil pipeline terminals into the Persian Gulf for the Iranian regime, and during the Iran-Iraq War and during Operation Praying Mantis, it represented a key area of success for the United States and was a key area being fought over. We also have Bandar Abbas and the Straits of Hormuz. This is a key area to capture and to hold on to. Not only does the Strait of Hormuz itself represent where we get a significant amount of international oil flow through, but also so it's economically important, but it also represents not only another vital oil pipeline terminal, but this is also where the Iranian regime bases the majority of its naval forces. And so by taking this limited area, just that area right there, I believe that the United States could exploit that key vulnerability. I've placed American troops representative at Jask, which is also, again, a key naval base for their submarine program and also part of their surface fleet. So I believe that that would be a key area to hold and maintain. And then, of course, we would want to have troops in eastern Iran, which is bordering Afghanistan and Pakistan. Now, there are only a few mountain passes through the western Afghanistan and Pakistan and eastern Iran area that would provide geographic egress into Iran. But it would be key to have some troops there in that location in order to ensure that jihadist fighters would not cross the border. Taliban army forces would not cross the border and try to support the Iranian government. Now I've shaded in here Isfahan and Qom. These two cities have more symbolic purposes. Qom is a little bit higher on the symbolic list and would probably represent a very key place to occupy because it is the religious heartbeat of the regime. It is where the seminaries are located. It is where pretty much all of the 88 Guardian Council live and work out of. It literally represents the heart of the Iranian government. This is a place that would be fought for and would be very strategic. Isfahan certainly represents a part of the nuclear program, and there is a lot to recommend definitely seizing that area. But I believe that seizing the spiritual hub of Iran is probably a more viable target, and I'll explain why. Von Clausewitz says on page 529, the capture of a fortress or a strip of territory also amounts to a destruction of the enemy forces. It may lead to further destruction and thereby become an indirect means as well. So the occupation of an undefended strip of territory may, aside from its direct value in achieving an aim, also have value in terms of destruction of enemy forces. We definitely see the rough draft that that statement is, but basically what he is saying, and what I believe is key, is this: if these areas are seized, especially the ones not only circled but also represented by the black line and what is behind it, I believe that we could draw Iran into a very significant fight. Breaking those pieces away would not only, it would serve two purposes. One, it would bring the Iranian troops to us. We do not necessarily have to go out and into the country to fight them. We only need to bring them to us. So we should exploit the geographic vulnerabilities and opportunities that Iran offers, and just by simply being a presence on their ground, they are going to want to attack us there. That is also part of the thinking behind seizing Qom and a significant territory and inducing essentially a siege. It would present an opportunity to attract the Iranian forces like a magnet and attempt to really destroy them there. And of course, in large amounts of areas, especially those that are circled and the ones behind the line, we would be able to maintain very strong air superiority. Of course, knocking out the Iranian Air Force would definitely be key, and I believe would be possible. But one of the biggest problems which I observed in the Trump plan of flying strategic bombers over Iran is that Iranian defense is based around missiles. Their entire defense program is missile based. They are very little investing in traditional tanks, armored vehicles, and other equipment. They're pouring the great majority of their military weight into missile attacks. Therefore, if slow, lumbering bombers are flown over Iran, they likely face the prospect of being shot down and destroyed as they're going over. So I really believe that limiting our air exposure is going to be a key strategy, and we're also going to have to rely on our allies in the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, and even Bahrain in order to attack them. I'm not sure that we can count on Qatar given their close relationship with the Iranian regime. They may actually represent a very problematic force in that situation. So again, I believe that we can induce the Iranian troops to come to us, but we can also induce the Iranians themselves to rebel. If the Army, if the IRGC and the regular Army are concentrated on fighting American forces there, then they're not going to be able to address any uprising that the common Iranians carry out against their government. And so we may be able to induce them to further strain the resources of the government and might even be able to provide arms and support from these mutually reinforcing positions and actually aid in the further destruction and dismantling. I call this something of a reverse Jenga strategy, or if you will, when I was a child, I had a game called Break the Ice. And even though, well, it's again a reverse on the point of the game was you knock out certain ice cubes and you try to not let it collapse. But in this case, if we knock out just a few key areas, then I believe the entire country would collapse and the government would fall. And I believe that if we can induce a natural rebellion in the country, it may limit our exposure and any public negative reactions, once again, to a long-term siege or a long-term occupation. Because and I think that we could have even done this in Iraq if we had gone into southern Iraq, also into northern Iraq, and placed our forces there, and then slowly provided arms to the people rebelling, we may have been able to secure those areas much better, but also watch the government fall a little bit faster and in a manner that we could control to a greater degree. As it says in Clausewitz, page 549, at the bottom, they will therefore consist in threatening his lines of communication with its depots, rich provinces, important towns, or key points such as bridges, passes, etc., or in the occupation of strong positions uncomfortably located for the defender, or in the occupation of important towns, fertile agricultural areas, or disaffected districts which can be seduced into revolt, or in threatening his weaker allies, and so on. And this is the core of the premise: weakening the regime, causing it to erode and fall from the inside rather than pushing too hard from the outside. Taking those important vital resource areas, the port of Bandar Abbas represents oil, gas, electricity, food, key economic drivers, as well as their navy, JASC as well. Ahavez represents the majority of where they have their oil pipelines routed through, especially the Abadan facilities, which featured so prominently during the Iran-Iraq War. We could definitely take very strong pages from that war and reproduce those opportunities. The Port of Bushehr, again, an opportunity to strategically weaken the regime, deny them access to mobility, eventually causing them to lose their ability to mobilize by not having gas or oil, not having the ability to gather in replacement parts. Now, again, that is also why we should have forces in the north in Tabriz so that Azerbaijan and Russia could not reinforce, and also having the strategic bloc along the Afghan-Pakistan border, ensuring that there are no reinforcements or very limited reinforcements that can get through. And again, this just continues to reinforce this idea, but also eventually the areas under occupation can be brought together and unified over time. Expansion into the hinterland can be done once the armed forces from Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Kuwait could take over guard duty in the shore areas, allowing the U.S. and other allies to advance closer into the heart of the country and support insurrection in the country. Is war with Iran inevitable? In some ways, I do believe it is. Iran, in some ways, represents probably Iran and China represent very different types of threats, and Iran is the type of threat that is very militant, very open and obvious about its desire to overthrow the West in general, the United States and Israel specifically. And their confrontation with Israel will likely go hot at a certain point, and we will be brought into confrontation with them. I just really do believe that that's going to be fairly inevitable. Can we trust the leadership of Iran in this nuclear deal? I really would say no. The current leadership, Khamenei, Raisi, and many of the others who are now present approved the human wave attacks in the Iran-Iraq War. Also, after reviewing congressional testimony, the actual full congressional record of the Flight 655 disaster and the events since is very clear that that was entirely staged and stage managed to become a disaster. So we have seen that the Iranian leadership counts human life as very cheap and valuable only for accomplishing its purposes. There's no greater ideal. It's not that sacrifice is a great thing because people are giving their lives for patriotism. It's that people are told to give their lives to keep the government functioning and just the government itself. It's not for an ideal. It's not for greater rights. It's not for preservation of anything greater than the leadership. So I do believe that Iran, with its track record of abuse of not only just human rights, but basic humanity, tells us that they are a threat and will continue to be a threat well into the future. Thank you for viewing this presentation. If there are any questions, please feel free to direct them towards me and to email them. And I will certainly enjoy addressing those questions. Here is a list of references in order to follow up on many of the points that were made, maybe not all of them. But as said, this presentation was developed through extensive personal research, through research of Lawrence Friedman, Karl von Clausewitz, and several other media sources, as well as some of the sources mentioned during the course of this lecture. Thank you very much.